Okay, good morning, everyone. I just hit the record button. If anybody else pops in and you hear the beep, I'll just be letting people in as we go along. Thanks to all of you who decided to participate in this, and special thanks to Tom Spadia and Michael Iannuzzi and Kestenbaum. You know, before we kind of get started on the topic, which I know is super important or should be super important to all of us, Tom, why don't you just tell a little bit about yourself, your background, the firm, and then Michael, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, no, happy to. So thank you again, Gary, for putting this on. And as Lisa said before we started recording, obviously we all wish this was in person, but you know, we're making the best of it as we roll through here. So my name's Tom Spadia. I'm a franchise attorney. Harold Kestenbaum is my partner. My third partner is Josh Liana, some of you know. So, you know, I've had my law firm for 10 years. Harold and I teamed up, I guess it's almost 2 years now. And we represent about 250 brands. And before I was a franchise attorney, I sold franchises for a couple of different brands, Rita's Italian Ice, Huntington Learning Centers, and some other large brands. So I sort of went backwards, as my dad likes to joke about. Most people start out as lawyers and then end up in business. I started out in business and ended up as a lawyer. So as a franchise attorney, who used to sell franchises. Good Catholic boy in me, I get to say now I'm atoning for my sins and get to tell people all the things that they, you know, shouldn't do or have to be careful of, and we know where those boundaries are. So, you know, happy to be here. Love what we do. All we really do now is franchisors and the registrations and the FDD. And, you know, my wife sometimes says, stop talking about it because most people find it boring. So I'm happy to be in this group where people want to talk about it.
Great. Michael.
Very good. Thank you, Gary, you know, for including me. I really appreciate it. Good to see some familiar faces. So I'm Michael Iannuzzi. I'm a CPA and partner at Citron Cooperman & Company. We're a full-service accounting, audit, tax, and consulting firm, and I co-chair our firm's franchise practice. So we do all the audit work, tax planning, consulting for franchisors and multi-unit franchisees. We're very, very involved with the IFA. I absolutely love franchising. I grew up in the restaurant business and always wanted to be involved somehow, and accounting seemed to be that way. You know, pre-COVID, I would just travel the country to about 7-8 conventions a year, and I missed that greatly. I'm hoping to get back into that, you know, sometime towards the end of 21 into 22. Happy to be here, and hopefully I can help answer some questions.
Great, thank you, Michael. And most of you, all of you know me, Mario Cabroso. I'm the founder of Franchise Growth Solutions, which I started pretty much as a retirement business, but retirement quickly got disconnected from that idea. Thankfully, keeps me going every day. I started out in the Dunkin' Donuts world as a franchisee way back when it was time to make the donuts, when dinosaurs ruled the world, for those of us who remember.
I remember that.
Nice fun with Dunkin'. I launched my first consulting company and worked with the founders to launch a brand called Ranch One, which was one of the very first fast casual brands. Actually, it was launched before the term fast casual was even coined. It was just us and another brand called Cozy, and I worked with Harold on that brand. Moved over to Desert Moon, fresh Mexican, about 30 units with them as the chief development officer, and then went on to True Foods, which was a 100+ unit multi-brand concept before launching Franchise Growth Solutions. So that's a little bit about me. You know, why don't we just take...
Why is there a thread going through all those brands?
What the thread? Well, I was just going to get to you.
Right, exactly.
Thread. Harold, why don't you just give, you know, the quick skinny on yourself, and then I'll go around the room here. Maybe everyone just want to take, you know, 30 seconds, a minute.
That'd be great.
So, go ahead, Harold.
Well, I have been doing this for a lot of years, going on 44 years. And Gary's right. Actually, it was really before Ranch One, Gary. Remember Sports Dog?
Oh, how could I forget? My
right. Of course. That's how we first met, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've been representing franchise companies for all these years. And I sat on the board of Sbarro for 22 years. And I'm still doing it. At the ripe old age of 71, I'm still doing it. And I'm still doing it as hard as I did 40 years ago. And it's franchising is great, and despite the pandemic, it's still going to be great.
Absolutely.
It's going to be better in 21 and 22, and I'm waiting for my vaccine, which hopefully I'll get soon.
You can come out of the house.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, that's the skinny on me. And,
All right, Lisa, how about you?
and by the way, having joined Spady Eliana was the best move I've made in my career.
Oh, I thought meeting me was that.
That's ancient history.
Thank you, Harold.
But yeah, no, it was a great partnership, and we're doing great, and it's been very good for me, and I've really enjoyed it.
Great, thanks, Harold. Lisa, you got the floor now.
Sure. I'm Lisa Oak, and I can't help but be reminiscent about the events that Harold hosted for us in his office on Long Island, and where I met so many of you, and relationships developed from there. I too sort of grew up in franchising. I think I go back more than 30 years. We're not going to keep exact count. I was a toddler when I started in franchising. And today I am the Chief Development Officer at Big B Coffee, which is headquartered in East Lansing, Michigan, working remotely from my home in Connecticut. We're at 250 locations today, most of which are in Michigan and branching out into other states, with 144 in development.
Great, thank you. Below you is Dean. Dean?
Hi, I'm Dean Reese. I've been doing audits of small franchisors for about a decade now, a little longer. And I've been on both sides of the desk as consulting CFO inside of franchise companies. And before that, I was an auditor with Seidman and Seidman a long time ago, and was in the satellite communication business for a while with a common carrier for WTBS in Atlanta. And been doing this for auditing public companies as well, off and on. So
great. Thank you. Chuck Cooper, who I met at the IFX back in Chicago maybe 5 or 6 years ago. How are you, pal?
Hey, good to see you, Gary. Thanks for inviting me on. And my name's Chuck Cooper. I'm with Lee's Famous Recipe Chicken, CEO, and I've been doing that for a long time. Gary and I have known each other for 10 years or so. So thanks for inviting me to join in today. It's good to see you.
And Fred, my partner in everything that I do.
Right. Worked with Gary for many, many, many years in operations across many of the similar concepts he worked with. Today, I'm a restaurant consultant helping, budding restaurants franchise their business. We write manuals. We, help them kind of fine tune their business.
Thank you. Luigi. Are you there?
Hello, y'all. I'm here. I had to unmute. Hello, everyone. Luigi Cardillo Jr., Rico's Pizza out of Stamford, Connecticut. We're an emerging brand here. We have 3 corporate locations, 1 franchise location out in Long Island, and a day or 2 away from making another deal down in Florida. Gary's my consigliere, Harold Kestenbaum is my attorney, and Fred Curvin is one of my top enforcers in my capital regime. That's my story.
Uh-oh, watch out. Okay, then we have, is it Dana?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Dana.
I'm Dana Del Francia. I'm kind of new in franchise. I'm the managing director at Sub-Zero Ice Cream for the last 6 months, and Jerry invited me to join him in this meeting. So here I am.
Thank you. Okay, how about Grant?
Also on mute. Hey guys, Grant Marks. I'm a principal with the Riverside Company. I've been involved in franchising as an investor for going on 11 years. We at Riverside invest mostly in emerging and established franchisors. We've done it successfully in a couple different concepts globally. Today we are partners with a home care services business called Comfort Care. We are soon to be announcing some other platforms in residential and commercial services as well. And I'm excited to be here. I've known Gary for 5 years or so now. Spent a little bit of time on the franchisee side with my prior firm, and it's good to see a lot of familiar faces.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your new position, Grant.
Thanks, Lisa. And I should say I'm 2 months back at Riverside, where I started my career. I just rejoined the firm.
Great. Emil from Harlem Shake.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emil. I'm a co-founder of Fast Casual Concept in Harlem called Shake. We are a single store at the moment. We are
conference call right now with several
we're in the process of
owners and partners and
concept.
blah, blah, blah. What are you up to?
We hope to be ready to start rolling them out
Okay, let me, when I wrap this up, I'll give you a
during
call.
July of 2021.
Great. Thank you. Jay Ragusa.
Hello. Sorry, my camera's not working here. I'm on site here. We're working on our third company store. Actually, we're going to be opening our fourth company store. It's called Gopher Ice Cream out of Stamford, Connecticut as well. And we have 3 franchisees. Actually, we have 4 franchisees, and we're building his store as well. So I've been lurking around for many years, but now with the help of Gary and now Fred and Harold and Tom, we're getting the Gopher brand off the ground more. So thanks.
Thank you. Jerry from Sub-Zero. You're muted, Jerry. There you go.
So me and Naomi are here. You remember her?
Yeah.
And so we've had a store since 2004, 2005. Started franchising, had ups and downs. We've kind of gone through the cycles and pretty much made a lot of. Anyway, it's been fun, but most of the fun has been meeting people like you. I think I first met Lisa. Oh, he's 2008 or somewhere around there, and at least talking
At the ICSC.
But we first talked on the phone before we even started franchising. I think 2007, 2008. So, but anyway, we didn't know. I didn't make the connection until ICSC. So anyway, but we have about 40 units right now. COVID has hit ice cream pretty hard because we missed pretty much the entire summer. And that's, so we're trying to figure out how to, to propel to the next stage. And I'm Air Force veteran, and I started everything with military surplus. So all of my first store, all of my equipment was military surplus.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for your service. Thank you for that. And I'm going to come back to you later on because what you just mentioned about COVID and the ice cream business is very different than what Jay and I have experienced this summer with COVID in the ice cream business. And that's really part of the discussion here today. Doug Smith, my friend, my marketing friend, where are you? There you go.
I'm right here. Thanks, Gary. I've known Gary for the past year. We connected on LinkedIn. We've built up a friendship and a relationship. My business partner created a marketing platform 5 years ago that is unique and digital. We work with only restaurants, and we have clients around the world. A lot of them are franchises and people looking to franchise. So I'm here to learn and become a sponge and hear what you all have to say and your expertise.
Great. All right, let's jump up to Ruben, another guy I haven't seen in a long time, the Pop Bar.
Hey guys, Ruben Ben Yehuda, Pop Bar. Hey Gary, thanks for having me. You hear me okay?
Yeah.
Harold has been my lawyer through this past, 10 years or so.
Yeah, easily 10 years.
Something like that. But we started with Gelato on a Stick in New York City in 2010, one corporate location. About 2013 or so, we started franchising. We'll talk about ice cream and gelato if you want. I was going to say how many locations we have open now. I don't even know because of COVID. We hit 25 locations open. Some are in limbo. So I would say we're about 20 locations right now. Tough times. But we'll talk about that, and we're still here. So let's see. I'm optimistic.
That's great. Krista from Shaka Bowl.
Hi, I'm Krista Gormley. I'm one of the owners, operators, and founding partners at Shaka Bowl in Hoboken, New Jersey. I opened my first restaurant when I was 22 years old, right out of college, alongside my sister Kirsten, who is our executive chef. We met Gary about 1.5 years ago, I would say, who introduced us to Fred and Harold, who will be our attorney moving forward. COVID kind of gave us the much needed time to, get our numbers in line, get it set up with Restaurant 365, get our operations, everything in line. Shockable is a fast casual health food restaurant that is heavily needed in the fast casual sphere. If COVID showed us anything this last year, it's how imperative the need for health and well-being and food is. Food is medicine. So we're hoping that within 2021, we can put the pedal to the metal and start selling some of our locations.
Great. Thank you. What about Brad? Where's Brad? There he is.
Hi, I'm a franchise attorney in Utah. I'm here today with Jerry, Naomi, and Dana from Sub-Zero.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, Yelena. I'm putting you, there you go, Yelena.
How are you?
So just tell us a little bit about your brand and where you're at. We got a little bit from Emil.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Yelena Pasic. I'm the founder and managing member of Harlem Shake. As Emil already pointed out, we have one store currently that we opened in 2018. COVID has been a challenging year, but at the same time, we really are proud to say that our revenues remained pretty much almost intact. So that was a great sign as far as the brand viability goes. And we embarked on franchise journey with Fred and Gary in late 2018. We did some analysis and preparatory step, and currently we are in franchise development process. And we're looking forward to start selling, as Emil said, by July.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, the person with no name down at the bottom here with the phone number of 248. Who's that?
Good afternoon, Gary. Stephen Dimitrov with All American Pet Resorts.
Oh, how are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing, Gary?
Doing well.
I had the pleasure of meeting Gary last year. We're an emerging brand with All American Pet Resorts. We have 9 locations across the United States, and we are in the business of daycare and boarding dogs for people all over the country. And I appreciate the invitation, Gary. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so with that out of the way, why don't we, let me just kind of talk a little bit about the topic and why I wanted to meet with everybody here and get everyone's opinion, because some of us are new to this, some of us are veterans, and ideas are always welcome, especially in these times. So as we all know, we are all up for renewal of our FDD, or in, say, the case of Harlem Shake, or in maybe Shockable, we're actually just filing for the very first time. And one of the items in the FDD, item 19, which I'll ask Tom to give us a more detailed explanation in a minute, but item 19 is where we are allowed to disclose the financial performance of our units and some other things that we can put in there, cost and things like that. So the question that I have been asked a few times, well, more than a few times now, probably over the last maybe 3 or 4 months, is, hey, when we do our renewal, are we doing an item 19? And if we do, our numbers have been not so good compared to 2019, or in some cases, our numbers have been the same, or in some cases, our numbers have been even better. I mean, I know people in certain businesses where their numbers are better. So the question, and I'm going to toss it to Tom here, is how do you see this in a way that we can include numbers in our item 19 and not be misleading to our potential franchisees? I guess I'll kind of underscore that with knowing that there are some people who will hide behind COVID, or maybe their numbers aren't so great, and maybe they weren't so great even pre-COVID, and now they're using COVID as an excuse. And then there are the numbers that are great that are a result of COVID. I know for me, if I was presenting to someone, I wouldn't want someone to think it's always going to be that way. So what are your thoughts on item 19? Maybe give us a little color on that and some thoughts.
Yeah. So I would first kind of break it apart, right? I mean, I think if you dissect the item 19 and you think about, there's two things going on there. There's what are you allowed to say? What are the boundaries under the both federal law, and then some of the states will paint that box a little bit tighter. So we first have to kind of understand the boundaries. And that's, as the lawyer, that's the legal decision. What can we and can't we say? And then you brought up a very good point about the misleading. That blends over the legal, but, what is the business case of what do we want to say? Are we explaining the business? Look, I mean, at the end of the day, when I represent franchisees, you also say, many people say item 19 is the most important item in the FDD, not to de-emphasize what this whole topic is, but I don't think that's the case, right? I think it's item 20 and talk to franchisees. So I think, first off, anybody in franchise development, especially new franchisors, you have to recalibrate how you think about item 19. It's a historical, it's a picture, it's a data point, but you're not buying a mutual fund and with an expected rate of return. There's such a divergence of numbers between the different franchisees. So I think your first step is, in my opinion, more is better because it allows the franchisee to kind of digest. And, the middle of the year, I think, was a lot worse with the state regulators last year. And, there's another franchise attorney and other people who have dealt with this on the accountant side and franchisors. The regulators were all over the map. Do you need to file an amendment? What's happening with the numbers? Now that we sort of have a complete year, I expect it will be a little bit easier and we'll have a little bit more guidance. But one of the things that we're advising, to hit your point, Gary, head on the item 19, is I think people should fully disclose 2019 and fully disclose 2020 if you have those numbers. And if you were closed for 3 months, you disclose that. You put an asterisk. Now, there's some contradictory language, and I think this is something that's evolving, that you can't, the state regulators, if you're registering in Washington State, who's very difficult, in California, that they're pushing back sometimes on the disclaimers. And this is new territory. We've never done renewals after a pandemic, right? I mean, that's something that none of us have really dealt with. So I think as time goes on, but I think the word you use, Gary, is the most important word. Misleading. It can't be misleading. You have to basically show what happened. And I mean, we would be fighting with some of these state regulators who said, oh, you have to put in a risk factor about a pandemic. I mean, my gut reaction is, if you don't know there's a pandemic around, then you're too stupid to buy a franchise. Like, what do you mean? You have to disclose the prospects that there's a pandemic? No kidding. But, they do their job and we play the cat and mouse game. So I think, overall, when you think about item 19, so you did mention in there about not disclosing. I personally think that would be a mistake. I believe that, and I know that this has evolved over time. You go back, you guys were talking decades ago. It might have been 2080, where 20 people had an item 19 and 80% didn't. And I think it's really flipped. And so, especially with a lot of the consultant and broker networks out there, I think there's an expectation that you have an item 19. And so I think it looks worse if you don't. So my gut is you have to have a really good reason. Different business model, something different, the numbers just don't tell the right story. If there were a really good reason, in my personal opinion, not to have an item 19, I default to recommending clients have it. And not only for the sales standpoint, as a lawyer, I think you're better protected to have an item 19 than not. It's a lot harder, play it out. Someone joins the business, they fail, they start poking around, who told me what, how come I didn't do it? It's a much better argument to say this franchisee didn't meet the expectations of the franchisor, and this is what we wanted them to do in the item 19, so why didn't they get there, versus them making outlandish claims of saying, he said this, she said that, they told me this on the back of a napkin. It's more plausible to point to item 19 and say, no, we didn't. We had it. We gave it to them. If you say, oh, well, we never talked about numbers, people out of our industry may not believe that. So I think there's more protection to have an item 19 just at a baseline than to not. So I always recommend, and we always recommend you have it. So, and that is something that has evolved over time. So that being said, I think it also would be potentially bothersome if you went from having an item 19 and then you had COVID and you took it out. It is what it is. I mean, for us, we were recommending clients, don't waste a good recession. Close some underperforming units, because no one's going to blink and say, oh boy, you closed 10 units. And, for the person said, I don't know how many stores. If you have weak stores, close them. Nobody's going to complain about closed stores in 2020. Everybody knows what happened. So, that's kind of a way to take advantage of it. So with the item 19, yeah, I think it's more is there. So I don't want to grab all the time. I don't know, Mike, your thoughts on, on the item 19.
Yeah, I agree. I'm curious. I mean, Lisa, you've run huge organizations with Subway, and Chuck, you've got a lot of franchisees. What are your thoughts on item 19, Lisa? You're committed to including it, not including it?
Oh, I feel very strongly in agreement with Tom, and I'll add to that: the smaller the brand, the more critical it is. Tom made the comments perfectly. There's an expectation that you're going to produce the data, and if you don't, what are you hiding, right? So that's not going to serve you well in sales. Now, Gary referred to Subway. I kind of grew up in the Subway franchise organization back when it was a UFOC and an earnings claim. And we did not have an earnings claim. But by the time the game changed, and again, as Tom said, the pendulum swung for an expectation to include that historical data. Subway was huge. It didn't matter anymore. So Subway still does not provide that information. But Bigby certainly does. We're very proud of it. We will continue to. And I think it's a huge asset in sales. From the disclosure point of view, we have nothing to hide. Let's put it out. Let's ask the questions. Let's have the discussion.
Good. Thank you very much.
Gary, the FTC is considering making it mandatory to put in an item 19 with some caveats. A startup company that's got no units and maybe hasn't been operating for more than a year, obviously can't do an item 19, but there's been commentary that the FTC is really considering it. I don't know if they're gonna change the rule to make it mandatory or not, but that's one of the 3 or 4 things that's up for discussion in changing the FTC rule.
Well,
I have a. Oh, sorry, I was going to say I had a question.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, for someone like myself, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting who is the other emerging brand. Gary, you had mentioned I will need an item 19. Obviously, as Harold also just said, it's going to start become mandatory. But when you said it could look back 3 years, is that going to look back at myself, who was an independently owned small operating concept for the last 4 years now, or is it going to look at that from a franchise perspective? So I start with fresh sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And for Krista and for Emil and Yelena, because they're just launching, they've all been in business more than 2 or 3 years, but have no franchises. So what rules would apply to them? Because both their respective brands do very well. And again, as a person who is involved in the development of that, I would love for them to put in their corporate numbers, their corporate store numbers going back, 2 or 3 years. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the baseline. I mean, that's typically what happens is once you commit to an item 19, and the only risk of that is that you can't show your corporate stores without showing your franchisees. So once you have 0 stores because you haven't launched yet, but once you launch your franchisees, then you're going to have to disclose them. You can't just disclose corporate stores and not disclose franchisees. You have to disclose both. But I mean, I agree. I mean, for most people, that's the reason you decided the franchise, because, most people don't say, boy, I'm losing a ton of money. I better call Gary and Harold and franchise my business. I mean, it's usually the opposite, that you're doing well, so you want to bring that to the world.
Yeah, for sure.
In those situations with the company-owned units, if the model is slightly different or if the floor print's different, do you have to go into detail like that to describe maybe the company-owned unit differently than what the franchise unit would look like?
Yeah, I mean, you should. I mean, especially, and that happens a lot too. In fact, sometimes we've even had where you might have so many company stores, but only like 2 of them are really representative of the model. sometimes we'll get pushback from the state regulators. I mean, that's the tricky thing. And for those of you, especially the folks who are new, to remember the fact that when we do your franchise agreement and, Gary puts the numbers together and Mike puts the numbers together and we bless them and we put them in the FDD. If you're not registering in any states, that's not going in front of a regulator. So we're sort of using our own judgment as to the final, what goes into that FDD. So, you have to kind of predict the future of who would assault those documents. So to your point, Mike, that's a good point. Those are sometimes when we advise, believe it or not, sometimes you don't want to show an FDD, an item 19 can sometimes be misleading in the other direction. Whereas you might have a corporate store and it's 5,000 square feet and you've been in business for 10 years and it's overstaffed and it's in a perfect location, but now you're franchising a 1,500 square foot. So your store's doing, $2.5 million, but you really don't think people are going to even come close to that. Those are the times that I think you kind of got to stitch together and say, well, we don't want to oversell this thing and think people are going to be opening the same kind of location that we are. So that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's a case-by-case basis.
Tom, that's a great point, and you have warmed the heart of my partner, Fred, because one of the things that we do, Fred does sometimes, I get a little crazy, before we'll actually launch a brand, Fred will create, with the founder of the company, a prototypical model or a predictive model because, so for example, just to use my friends over at Harlem Shake, they've got an outrageously great concept. They've been there, they do a great job, but they happen to be on the corner, on a very busy corner. It's 124th Street in Lenox, in Manhattan, in Harlem. And, is that really the reality if we decide to, are their numbers, and I won't disclose that, but are their numbers the reality if we open up a shop on an in and end cap unit, say in, Ridgewood, New Jersey, in a shopping center anchored by a Stop and Shop? So we go through, Fred goes through a lot of trouble to create those predictive models. Not that we would use that in the item 19, but we do that because we want to make sure that once you start adding in royalties and all these other things, can the franchisee make money on this? Because if they can't, then to your point, Tom, what you've put into the FDD, which might be factual, is still at the end of the day misleading. So,
and listen, it's to get at the risk of getting a little off topic, we got to all remember that bad things happen when franchisees don't make money, and only good things happen when your whole job as a franchisor is to make sure your franchisees make money. Your job is not to sell franchises. That's the secondary job. Your primary job is for your franchisees to make money. So if you're giving them item 19s that don't put them in the right mindset, that they're not going to make the right investment and they're not going to be ready to make money, if you really in your heart don't think they're going to make money, stop selling franchises for a year and retool. And there's nothing wrong with that.
I will. I'll just comment on that, and I just want to go over to Michael for a question. But in terms of that scenario, in my mind, and what we work with our clients, I believe some startup franchisors, actually even some mature franchisors, they confuse what I call the lead indicator with the lag indicator. They believe the lead indicator is sell franchises, and that the lag is help your franchisees and collect royalties. I think it's reversed. I think is how are you helping your franchisees? Are they making money? And that leads to you'll sell more franchises. So I kind of switch that around. Lisa, you look like you're ready to say something. Go ahead.
I'm going to say something. It's those franchisees who are selling. We in franchise development get all the credit, but it's those successful franchisees who are making the sales for us.
Yeah, I don't get credit for anything. Trust me.
We're lawyers. We don't.
Michael, the other day you and I were talking about this topic when we were kind of getting ready for this, and you had mentioned something that I was not aware of. Again, I'm not an attorney, I'm not an accountant, but you had talked about, disclosing additional information in the item 19. Now, what I've seen is I've seen average, I've seen median, how many stores are above, how many stores are below. If it's a 10 or 12 or 15 unit chain, sometimes they'll list every store. It's always essentially top line sales. Sometimes it's and not much more than that. But what can you share with us?
Sure. So I've seen some really good ones out there. And before we cover that, the one thing I want to bring home is that a lot of this information is coming from the franchisees. So you have to make sure that once you're hitting 10, 20 plus units, that you have a mechanism in place to capture this information and to, populate it and to have it stored in case somebody asks about it down the road and they want you to verify the information used in the item 19. So be very careful of that you have the information in-house when you prepare it and that it can be audited by a regulator in case it gets questioned later. But one of the things that Gary and I were talking about, I'm curious also to hear what other people have to say. Everybody gets stuck on the numbers, top line, cost of goods sold, things like that. Some of the things that I've seen in the past is, does it make sense if you're using the item 19 as a sales tool, does it make sense to put things in like average turn, customer ticket, if you're a hair salon, number of booths that can go in, how many haircuts an hour you can generate, things like that. This way, if somebody wants to use a formula to see, well, how much money can I make per hour, they're getting more information than just $1 million top line. Because look, if you do $1 million in sales and it costs $1.1 million to run the place, I don't care if it's $1 million in sales, the place is worthless. So what else can we put in there to make the item 19 stand out from your competitors? That's not just financial data, but it's business data. And I'd be curious to hear from Tom and Gary and some others what they think about that.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not qualified to answer that, but Tom and Harold are.
Yeah, I mean, I think you made an excellent point about the, it was 2 points there. The first point about the gathering of the info. I think that is something that small franchisors don't spend enough time on. As basic as standard chart of accounts. This is how we're actually going to, this dollar of expense means this dollar of expense for everybody. And so I think you're dead on right with the fact that people should have that. I mean, there's some programs out there, they can get it in real time. I hate when franchisors are like, oh, I'm getting every month they send me just some report. You should be able to go in there and pull that stuff where you can't rely on it. So I think that's one thing, is that lack of sophistication can hurt you on the negative side. If you ever ask for it, can you prove it? And roll the clock forward when we're going to talk to private equity 5 to 7 years from now. That's the first thing they're going to really want to look at, is what do these numbers look like at a baseline? As far as cost, look, I'm a big believer in transparency. I think the more you share, you have to balance that, of course, and you have to always recognize that anything you put in your FDD, you're also putting into your competitors' hands. So that would be the only break I would put on that, is just recognize that the FDD is a public document, so that item 19 is also something, but that's a small risk compared to your franchisees being successful. But yeah, I think that's a very good idea. Occupancy cost percentages and labor rates.
I want to go to Chuck, because earlier I had a question for him, but Michael brings up a really good point. If you've got kind of this depth and breadth of franchisees, how do you do it? Chuck, you got a lot of units out there. If I recall, the last time we spoke, you were about at 130. Where are you at now?
Yeah, Gary, we're still about at the same place. We've sold some, we've closed some. And I think the challenges that we have are, we have a different business model, and we have different agreements that don't require that licensee in some cases to report financial information. We can request it and they can give it to us, but it's not a requirement. So if you can't do all of them, you can't really represent some of those financials. And so with a different business model, it's a little bit different. And I think our goal this year is to continue to disclose exactly how we've been disclosing. We happen to have been, done well through the pandemic. We have drive-throughs. We've done really well with that. So, but because of the nature of the different contracts and the source of contracts, we're working on getting everyone literally on the same contract. But that takes some time. And if you can only get 80% of your financials, that poses a problem, because then it goes back to what the guys are saying is, looking back on it, why'd you only present 80% of the system? Was it the worst 20% that you left off? And so we've had to kind of tread carefully with that. Hopefully that's answering your question.
No, it does. And it kind of leads me to the next piece. And I had read this maybe 3 weeks ago in an article, which is really what got my wheels turning. And that was that there are some, for those of you who operate in registration states or want to operate in registration states like New York, for example, or Illinois and Maryland, that there was some talk that some of the individual states might require specific regulations as it relates to item 19 and COVID. And one of the things I heard was that they may want quarterly, their item 19 to be broken down quarterly, because in some places, like say New York, perhaps not New York City, but outside of New York, the first quarter, was probably okay. The second quarter was probably terrible. Third quarter came back, and then we kind of went into the surge again at the fourth quarter, and those numbers are kind of all over the place. What have you guys heard, Tom, Mike? What have you heard about, regulators wanting numbers broken out monthly or quarterly?
So I haven't heard directly from any regulators that have said that, because we haven't really hit yet where we've put that out there. But wouldn't surprise. But I would say that if you're a franchisor and you had a really big bar on quarterly, I would break it out anyway. I would do it without being asked. I mean, I don't, it's very rarely that a regulator asks for something that makes a lot of sense, but I think that actually makes a lot of sense for to disclose it that way, because and also to Chuck, to your point, that's a problem that we've had with a lot of legacy brands about lack of information. And Gary, it actually falls into the same thing. You might struggle to get your franchisees to be able to disclose that, because they're shoebox accounting if you're not organized there. But I think you can only disclose the information that you have. So if you just properly say it, this explains it, this is the data set, we don't have that other data, so we're excluding them, you should be okay. You can't exclude them because they're bad, but if you don't know about them, obviously bring that up with your attorney, but I think that that's a common thing that happens, where you only get so many, and you need a reasonable basis to exclude the data. So I think that's a fine thing to do. But in terms of COVID quarterly, I think you got to tell the story of COVID, and that also goes back to the fundamental rule of item 19, not like the legal rule. You got to think of it as the four corners. So when we launch a brand, we do kind of franchise sales compliance, and who the heck wants to sit and listen to a lawyer for so long? So I always say that people are only going to remember a couple of things. There's two things you need to remember in franchise compliance. One is they need their FDD for at least 14 days, and that FDD has to be legal, updated, and if it's in a state registered. And the second thing is you can't talk about any kind of numbers or finances that are not in the four corners of your franchise agreement. And if that's all you remember as a franchise salesperson, you're probably going to be okay. So to the point, if you don't it might be misconstrued if you put an item 19 in for the whole year, and then you start telling people things like, well, that's like 25% off because those numbers were if you broke it down quarterly, the second quarter didn't have any sales. Well, let me tell you, that's a problem if you didn't put that in your item 19. So you should almost think about it backwards, and you should role play the conversations you want to have with someone in June, and think about how you're going to tell the story of what happened in 2020, and then talk to your franchise attorney to get that story into item 19 so that you can tell a story with numbers behind it. Don't start with the numbers and then create the story. Create the story. Well, that sounds really awful, right? If I was misquoted there, that would sound awful. Create the story and then put the numbers. What I mean is create the storyline and then go back and have your item 19 be reflective of the storyline you want to tell, including increases and, because it's all over the map. We have some clients who actually surged and did great.
Right. And to that point, I'm going to kind of jump down to my client, Jay Ragusa, over at Gopher Ice Cream. And again, no numbers. You don't need to reveal any numbers, Jay. But I believe, you know, in our conversations, you had mentioned to me that you're having a really good year, maybe one of the better years you've ever had, and certainly better than last year. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, we've been trucking along here. Part of it is our demographics. We're in little affluent areas here in Connecticut, and sometimes we pay the price of the ice cream business. Everyone's off in Nantucket, you know, so some of that seasonality, people stayed home, you know, stayed here, and we offered something for them to do. We were able to stay open. Wasn't easy. We put a lot of online sales as well. So add all that together, yeah, we had every store was up pretty good.
So Tom, to your point, Jay's story is one of, if I had to capsulize it, I would say, first of all, in the early days of the pandemic, I know I found myself in the Dairy Queen like every night, okay, because I think ice cream is a comfort food. So I think that was a driver. The fact that Jay's units are in Fairfield County, in the suburbs, people weren't going into Manhattan, they were staying at home. The kids were not in school, and so you had more kids around. Parents were attempting to become school teachers, and I don't know, maybe bribing their kid with an ice cream cone if they did their homework. So there's a lot of circumstances surrounding the ice cream business that, to me, just as kind of not knowing the ice cream business, although I'll defer to the fact that I used to have a frozen custard brand, it just stands to reason that in the current pandemic and the situation that existed last summer, it stands to reason to me, as a layman, that things like ice cream, and I'll look at Luigi here and say, you know, pizza delivery, that those things just naturally are going to look better. So is that the story?
I mean, that's a hard one. That's actually a harder one to deal with than the people who dropped in some weird way on item 19, because I'm assuming you're not talking about, you know, 50% up, or, you know, you had a great year. But a great year is, you know, just the normal sort of expectations. And you don't want to be like shooting yourself in the foot and telling people, although, you know, it goes back to being misleading. I think, you know, to contradict myself earlier, I think those are the kind of words you can say, like, hey, here's our item 19. I don't know that I would put those disclaimers. I mean, now you're talking about like an anti-sales document. I wouldn't necessarily put these disclaimers that, like, we had a great year because everybody was home, so that's never going to happen again. Because on the flip side, you did a lot of delivery, you learned a lot of things, you know, that increase, and that, and the truth is, there's a whole nother hidden thing. A lot of my clients, even food service, expect to have a good year in 2021 because guess what? A lot of their competitors are gone. So, you know, you might have had a great year, but a lot of these competitors are gone. So now there's a vacuum of demand. So I wouldn't go crazy. I mean, I would just disclose, in that case, I would disclose the sales, and I might verbally say that in a conversation like, hey, look, I want you to be realistic when you get in this business. 2020 was a good year for our business because a lot of people weren't home. You're going to have to hustle, Mr. Franchisee. You're going to have to spend the marketing, go out there and knock on doors so that you're at least verbally on record to say, hey, you know, this wasn't the baseline. This was a good year.
Look, and some of those things.
If I could say something.
Get Dean.
Basically, for a guy that is, in the old days, used to write MD&A for a publicly traded company, in the days when you couldn't do any forward-looking statements, I think that this is an opportunity, basically, to have a item 19 be a form of the MD&A, where basically you describe what happened and you describe the effects of COVID in the real terms, and compare that with what happened in non-COVID times in 19, and paint the picture of what the actual difference was in terms of dollars and cents and the effect on net income and everything. I mean, just because from my perspective, the financials are actually, like, franchisors are a quasi-public company. If you read the FTC rules, basically they've delegated the accounting rules to the SEC. So from that perspective, although most franchisors are not publicly traded, they still have to, if the SEC ever wanted to say, well, you have to do it according to the way that we want to, and they pretty much have delegated that to the FASB. I think it's if you keep that in mind, and when you're writing what you put in item 19, that again, you're kind of constrained by, if you're a public company in some respects, then you write what the reality is and compare the reality in 20 to the reality in 19, and then it's clear to everybody, and then everybody's going to know that this is, so when you get to 21, then you would compare what happened to 21 to 20 and 19 and so on and so forth. So basically you're talking about, the 3-year period, which is, if you're a publicly traded company, that's what you have to talk about. So if you look at, if that makes sense, it's just my opinion, but.
No, it does. It does. And Jerry, you have a question. I don't know if it's on that point.
I just kind of, I really like what Gopher Ice Cream had to say. I thought that was really interesting. And it's kind of interesting to see, looking at our stores, where the demographic is different, finding out where your customer is. Like we have, our downtown store where our office is, downtown Provo, which is not a big town, but the major office, the major university sent everybody home early, plus the shutdown. But now that store is actually about even from last year, even with all that. But there's other stores that were in downtown Indianapolis and downtown Atlanta that were our best stores that had, they were boarded up because of the BLM movement. And in Atlanta, they were right there at Centennial Park, so they actually got broken into, but didn't close them down very long. But it's just, the mixture seems to be what's really interesting. Malls versus, inline, different states, different cities, different demographics. We just took over a franchise store that is around a lot of office complexes, and now the office complexes aren't there. Also, catering was about 40% of some of our stores' business, 40 to 60% at some stores, and that's evaporated for a time. It'll come back. So it's interesting to see that balance, and showing that balance in how that fluctuates.
Yeah, well, certainly location and circumstances. I mean, Jay's units being in the suburbs and the units you described being in urban centers kind of tell that tale. I mean, I have clients that operate in Midtown Manhattan that I'll be gentle and simply say they've been crushed. They are coming back, but I don't know that they'll ever come back at the same level that they were pre-pandemic. I guess, the whole point of this discussion, and then I'd like to open it up for any other questions, is it seems that there are a lot of variables here in terms of what actually went on with our respective businesses, not only in the category, but also in specific locations. And those locations may be in different states, which have different rules, but also in different venue. Years ago when Fred and I were building out Desert Moon, Fred, I don't remember, but how many units did we have? The first units, they were all in malls, right?
Correct. Yep.
So, if that's the case where you have units in malls, your suburban units might be doing great out on the street, and your mall units or your Manhattan units might have gotten crushed. How do you verbalize that, or how do you represent that?
Well, I think you could categorize it in an item 19, and you could literally, I would say, here are my groups of units, and I think Dina had mentioned, I think putting your 2019 against your 2020, I mean, that kind of tells the story, right? Here's 2019, here's 2020, and if you had this even you could go, hey, I had downtown units, these are downtown units, and these are suburban units, and just divide them in a way that logically makes sense, and then group them.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think it goes hand in hand with like kind of what Michael was saying, and then what Dean was saying. It's like anything, even what you said in the beginning, Gary. Obviously, everyone that looks at 2020 is going to be like, okay, this might have happened. There could be a million other reasons, social, demographic factors that affected certain areas specifically. It's what it is. I was going to say, or I guess ask, how, like you said, Gary, the first quarter was okay. It's 2020, and then the pandemic hit and numbers dipped. We hit the summer. As you guys are like us, our numbers through the summer were the same, if not better than the year prior. And then the second wave of COVID came when it got cold and everyone kind of went back into hibernation and those numbers went down again, and now they're shooting back up. So would you, like Tom said, would you categorize that, and can you play out the nature of how the virus hit on a kind of economic and socioeconomic scale?
Yeah, well, that's a great,
in terms of your numbers.
It's a great question, and I think what's important here is that as we continue to develop your FDD to get you ready for launch, is that, you know, my opinion is going to be based on how do we present that information and not kill a deal. And, you know, I would defer obviously always back to Tom and Harold, your attorneys, to say, okay, how do we do that and also not mislead your, you know, your prospect? So what's the balance there? I personally wouldn't have the answer, because I don't think the answer is in a vacuum. I think the answer is, as Tom mentioned earlier, it's a balance between, you know, what you want to say, what you need to say, and what should be said in order to present the information as factually as possible without, you know, puffing it up or without killing the deal. And the numbers are the numbers. So Tom, I would defer to you on that.
Well, I mean, you can't, there's no real rule against more detail. So, I mean, you could, especially if it's a corporate store and, you know, you're talking about, you know, you're not talking about 100 stores where someone's was, I mean, I had a client years before that they had like 150 stores and they put the P&L of every single store. It was an exhibit. That was the P&L of every single 150 stores. So you can piece that thing apart. I mean, if you want to put in, hey, because of the, I mean, I would probably stay away if we're going to go to registration states from too much commentary, like, oh, this is when COVID did this and this is that. Those are more, I don't want to minimize it by saying their opinions, but those are not going to be looked at as like financial disclosures versus just saying, hey, this is what our monthly sales were. And verbally, then you can say, hey, this kind of tracked what was happening in our cities here. But you can see in a really good month like September, we did X, and you know, that would, if you had a really big wave, then disclose that wave, because not disclosing that wave is misleading.
Okay, well, we'll certainly be talking with you about that as it comes up, because we're going to be working with Krista and her team on that sort of thing. Look, I want to be really respectful of everyone's time. We had talked about an hour here, and we're almost approaching that. I just would like to know, does anyone have any questions while we're here together that you want to ask, or any other comments on this?
This is Dana Del Francia. I have just one question. When we're stating 219 compared to 2020, and is there a chance of being misleading to potential franchisees that would state, gee, we were doing so well in 2019, COVID really hit us in 2020, but is it misleading in a way to the potential franchisee that we're saying, well, now that COVID's over or can be over, that you'll do as well as what was happening in 2019? We're just trying to be careful of mentioning or how we mention the comparison between the two, because they're just numbers and comparisons, but we will have statements regarding COVID, but we don't want the potential franchisees to feel that that things will start up again like in 2019.
Well,
that's an unsure thing.
The way I would answer that, Dana, is I would go back to my sort of original baseline of how you approach a franchise sales and item 19s. Is at the end of the day, it's the franchisee's business. The item 19 is simply a data point. What happened in the world in COVID is a data point. All this stuff is data points. They're not guaranteed success. You have as much information about the future as they have, and they're not buying if they're that spreadsheet crazy, then they should buy an apartment building with an ROI. They're small business people, and they're going to get in there, and they got to hustle, and they got to go out and drop coupons, and they got to smile and kiss babies. And if they don't do that, it doesn't matter what your item 19 is, they're not going to be successful. So that's how I would approach it.
Hi, it's Jelena Pasik. I have one more question. Tom, you mentioned two major rules when speaking on FDD, and would you mind just repeating the first one?
Yeah, the first one is make sure that when you deliver an FDD, you give them the right one and that they have had it for at least 14 full calendar days. And when I say the right one, it means that if you're selling them in Pennsylvania, but they live in Maryland, you better make sure you're registered in Maryland. So the state registrations and all of that, and I'd love to chat with you online how we approach that. So they're the two rules. They got the right FDD and they had it for a sufficient amount of time before they wrote you a check or signed a franchise agreement. And you didn't talk, and then the second rule is all the stuff we talked about today.
Right.
You didn't talk about numbers outside
And
of that.
Tom, what I want to add to that, because Yelena had asked me a question in the chat, and earlier you said you want to make sure you manage that, and you said within the four corners of the FDD. You didn't, I think, Yelena, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you maybe misheard. The numbers had to be within the four, like.
I just meant like think of your document.
It wasn't entirely clear. That's
Yeah, no. So think of your document. Here's your whole document. Here are the four corners. And if the number is not in the FDD, if it's not in your item 7, if it's not in your item 6, if you're not talking about it somewhere in that document, most of it in item 19, don't say it.
Don't say it.
Yeah.
okay. Now it's clear. Thank you so much.
Keep it simple. If you're not referencing, if you can't point to the number that's coming out of your mouth in your FDD, you shouldn't be saying it.
All right. Any other comments? And I see that some of our friends from Rooster and Rice out in San Francisco are joining the meeting, but we're just getting ready to wrap up. So I will have to send Eugene and Andini a recording of this. But I just want to know if there's any other comments or questions here from the group. Michael, anything you want to offer in closing here?
Yeah, I just want to go back again to the factual information that you're collecting. Make sure you're just organizing it. You know, franchisees and everybody there's so many different methods of accounting, you know, GAAP basis, accrual basis, tax basis, your own basis. So just make sure that you're collecting the right information, organizing it the right way, and presenting it the way that it needs to be presented so it's fair and accurate.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Otherwise, are there any other questions? Nope. Okay. So here's what we got. I have this recorded. Shoot me an email if you want a copy of it. I will probably put a private link on YouTube because this is probably too big to email out. So you'll have access to the information. I guess I'm not sure we settled anything here today, which is okay. I think my overall goal was to bring this to everyone's attention that this is a very real issue. This is item 19 for me is always an issue. This year, I think it's a bigger issue. I would say, for the franchisors in the room, get huddle up with your attorney and your accounting firm, and even your friend dev people, and put together, as Tom says, the story. Make sure the numbers are accurate. Be as transparent as possible, meaning put more in there than perhaps you need to put in there, and it is what it is. I think although I hate that expression in this particular case, I think it is what it is. I don't know how you take the circumstances that Jerry described at Sub-Zero, match them to what Jay described at Gopher Ice Cream, or what Lisa's going through, or what any of us are going through. So I think transparency, accuracy, and tell your franchise salespeople, not to tell stories. It is what it is. It's in the FDD, the four corners of the FDD. Anything you want to add, Tom, before I kind of hit the stop button here?
No, great, good stuff. Thanks, appreciate it. Happy to be a part of it.
I appreciate all of you participating today, and it's good to see you all. I hope to see you in person at something, or the IFA or something soon. I think we're closer to the end than we are to the beginning. Like I said, let's have a prosperous 2021. For those of us in the restaurant business, build outs of restaurants has gone down. There's a lot of second-gen restaurant space out there. Money's cheap. People are looking to do something. They're not going back to corporate America. We got our friends in companies like Benetrends that can help potential franchisees, leverage their 401s. 2021 should be a really good year for franchising.
I'm with you there.
Do it.
Take care. Thank you.
Take it easy, guys.
Absolutely.
This is great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks.
My
Bye,
pleasure.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
All right. Be good. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.